Cindy, now let's talk about the effects, short term, long term, of sexual violence, especially in the conflicts.
Yeah, the effects are multi-layered, and no two individuals are exactly the same. And sexual violence is a different type of crime compared to other crimes. It's not the same as being robbed or anything else. It's really a violation of your humanity and your dignity. And so I think first and foremost, it is a psychological scarring that is very difficult to overcome, which is then compounded by social scarring, because as Catriona was saying, there's so much victim blaming. We live in a culture where somehow they find a way to make it the fault of the survivor. We've all heard the stories of when something happens to a woman, the first question is, what was she wearing? What was she doing walking down that street? Why was she out late at night? That's the prevailing attitude in society. So there's another layer of social rejection, which means that normally when you're a victim of other types of abuse, there's like a social safety net, there's friends, there's people you can talk to, but so many people are forced to keep this experience inside. And then again, as Catriona said, there might be an economic or livelihood impact, because once in a community, people see you as a sexual violence survivor, it tarnishes your image. It can even restrict your access to job and livelihood opportunities, particularly if you speak out. There's a lot of backlash against women who are strong and confident enough to come out and say, what happened to me wasn't right. So the layers of violence are multiple. There's the physical act of violence, there's the psychological violence, social violence, and possibly also economic violence. And that's why the response to sexual violence has to be equally holistic. We cannot just focus on, providing medical support to a survivor and leaving it at that, or just giving them a livelihood kit and leaving it at that. We really have to address those different layers of violence that a survivor has experienced.
So they've begun speaking out. Now, do you think that survivors are being heard enough?
Definitely not enough. There's a root and branch change in our cultural understanding of the role of women and what sexual violence is. Sexual violence doesn't occur in a vacuum. It's an epidemic, and it's rooted in certain societal norms about how we see women. And that extends beyond the realm of sexual violence. Women are just not being listened to, not being heard in all sectors of life. And this is one manifestation of that fact. And we have a very long way to go at all different levels. And it's not just a question of men listening to women. There's a lot that we as women can also do to create a supportive environment for our fellow women who are suffering.
So what would be the benefits if survivors actually are heard? What would it do for them, for us, for the society?
Well, the number one thing is to shift the culture of blame. Hear the perspective of the survivor and understand that what has happened to them is in no way, shape, or form their fault. The blame belongs on the perpetrators of violence, and they need to be brought to account. So shifting that mentality that somehow a survivor of violence must be guilty or must have done something, and really focusing the attention on the perpetrators of violence. The second is giving a space for survivors to actually heal. I believe, and from the feedback that we've gotten from the women and girls we've worked with in the Northeast, there is a catharsis about being able to actually, release what you've experienced. One of our psychosocial support facilitators said, it's like walking around with a stone in your shoe. You have this constant pain, and then once you let go, once you take that stone out of your shoe, it doesn't mean your shoe is comfortable, but at least you release a little bit of that pain. And so a lot of what the women and girls we've been working with have said that that act of feeling free to speak it and to acknowledge that what has happened, and to have other people also acknowledge it, instead of just, you know, being forced to carry it inside you and being told to act like it's not important, is really, it goes a long way towards the healing and towards being able to create these communities of survivors who then feel empowered to speak about their experiences, and again to shape the way we view the violence and focus our attention on the perpetrators of violence. And as Catriona said, you know, a culture of accountability. So it's not just that we have women who are survivors, there are people who have perpetrated acts that need to be brought to justice. I wouldn't say that women are always on the receiving side, but they form the majority of victims of sexual violence. And it's about power dynamics, as Catriona said. And in society, the way our societies are currently structured, women are less powerful than men, and anybody who's in a position of vulnerability compared to someone else is going to suffer the effects more when there's violence. And so that disparity that exists during peacetime becomes even more prominent during wartime. And with that in mind, we also need to pay attention to other types of vulnerable groups. While women do form the vast majority of victims of sexual violence, there are also men who are victims, and the same patriarchal norms stop them from speaking out, because it's considered, you know, like a big shame for that to have happened to a man. So you also have a huge number of men who are suffering in silence, who don't dare speak out. They have also been violated, and their dignity has also been attacked, and they also have no means of social support, because there are those norms that a man is supposed to be strong and powerful, and, you know, being weak and crying and needing help is not a manly thing to do. So I think my answer is just that, is that because of the power structures in society, when there's violence, those who are in a position of less power are more likely to suffer. And that's why women tend to form the majority of sexual violence victims.
Cindy, what more do you think we can do to actually, you know, put in place to help other women, to help girls to seek for help?
I think the responsibility starts with each of us. So I know a lot of people might be listening and thinking, wow, this is a lot. What can I do? Like legal aspects. Maybe I don't have law training. I'm not an activist. I can't do this or that. And it feels overwhelming, but there's always something that each of us can do. And I think the best thing we can take away is to look at you yourself. What can you do? And it might just be maybe listening to that survivor in your life, you know, taking a different attitude. If you're a man and you hear someone, you know, harassing a woman or saying or doing something inappropriate, speak out, you know, listen to the women in your lives, try and support them. We all know that it's a societal issue, and that means that each one of us has a role to play. And I think if we can go away from this conversation and pledge to be more conscious about these issues, to be more aware of these subtle dynamics that are taking place, and to do whatever we can in terms of our own attitude and behavior within the areas that we have influence.
You've worked in other countries too, right?
Yes.
So what other things are they using that we don't have in Nigeria that we need to be doing, that we need to put in place?
I mean, there's no magic wand, right? It's not rocket science. It's about the way that we perceive and treat women. From the moment that a society believes that women are equal and that they have a role to play in the same way that men do, things will become obvious from there. So there's no, you know, very complex legal framework that has to be put in place. There's a lot that we've talked about, you know, security and justice and social norms and so on. But for countries where it has worked, it starts with that fundamental acknowledgement that women are people and women are equal. And from that, you can now attack every issue, whether it's the justice framework, whether it's the security architecture, whether it's economic empowerment. You can attack it from that lens. I don't know if I would say that, you know, there's a specific thing that we have to do to get to where we are. It's a holistic approach, and it starts from the bottom up, but also the top down, and it affects every single sphere of our society.
especially for someone who's had this opportunity to always come across, survivors of sexual violence from conflict zones, conflict areas, what should be the appropriate response to the question from them? Can you hear me? Can you hear my call for help?
The short answer is yes. I hear the call, and I'm fortunate enough that I have never experienced anything on that level, so I cannot act like, I understand everything about how that feels, but I can hear and I can sympathize, and I feel like if somebody like Tabitha is brave enough after everything that she has experienced and risked to come and speak about it, the very least that the rest of society owes her is to listen to her. That's the very minimum. And what I do is not just because it's my job and because we have a project and funding. I do it because, as a peace builder, I believe we have a shared humanity, and what is happening to other people sooner or later affects all of us. Nigeria will never be at peace and happy if Borno State is in violence. And there's, a saying that says, until we are all free, none of us are free. And so we have a duty to each other as a society, as communities, to listen to these voices and to do everything that we can to respond to what they are telling us. Thank you very much again for having me on this panel.
Thank you, Cindy.